Can a tropical storm in Mobile stop your loan closing in Miami? You have questions, we have answers. Let's get into it. When I was younger and in school, before modern day storm tracking, the way we used to track hurricanes and tropical storms was on a map, usually given out by a local grocery store or gas station. Sometimes it was even printed on the side of paper bags that grocery stores gave out. And every day we'd look to find the longitude and latitude of the storm, and we'd put it on the little dot, and then we'd start to create lines so that we can see the trend of where a hurricane was going. It was a public awareness campaign of helping people be aware of where hurricanes and tropical storms are. As I got into the insurance industry, this became really important because there used to be this imaginary box, a latitude on two sides, one just in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, one near the Gulf of Mexico, one under Cuba and Jamaica, and one going up to just about Georgia. And this imaginary box was the place where if a storm walked into, if a storm just tracked into, all of a sudden, you could no longer bind insurance. Insurance companies, whether they were for cars, boats, homes, commercial property, if the track entered that box, that imaginary box, all of a sudden insurance coverage would stop. Thankfully, as time went on and storm tracking became a much more sophisticated and much more accurate process, that box is no longer what companies use to determine whether or not they're going to be starting or ending binding. But it's a still important tool because the reason the box existed in the first place was that if a storm entered into that area, the likelihood of southern Georgia, Florida, Texas being affected by that storm was very, very high. It was just hard to predict exactly where. So even today, as we see storms coming into that area, the general lower Caribbean, eastern Florida, Atlantic Ocean, we have to keep a close eye to see what's going to be impacted. Because you see, though the companies no longer use the full box in order to decide whether or not they're going to be making coverage effective, they still use rules that can affect whether or not you can close on your loan. The difficult part about it now is that those rules are no longer uniform. Before, everyone used to have this one rule that entered the box. Now, different companies are using different methodologies to decide when to stop binding coverage and when to start binding coverage pre and post storm. For homeowners in the state of Florida, the most common way is basically if there is a tropical storm or hurricane watch or warning anywhere in the state. And I do mean anywhere. The reason I used Mobile as our example in the first one, even though it's not in Florida, is because a tropical storm in Mobile could actually have a tropical storm watch or warning in the Florida Panhandle. And even though it's nowhere near the southern tip of Florida where we are here in Miami, if there is a watch or warning for that area, most homeowners insurance carriers stop binding coverage for the entire state of Florida, all the way down to Key West. What that means is during storm season, which runs from June 1st all the way to November 30th, we actually have to keep an eye on where storms are in order to know if and when we can bind coverage. And this can be a very big deal for your loan closing. No matter how many loan closings go on in the state of Florida on any given day, whether for homes or for commercial properties, the process is very fluid and can change constantly. And one of the things that affects the loan closing is the ability to bind insurance coverage. If we're not paying attention to where a storm is during the loan closing process, it's possible that when you decide to bind that coverage for the loan closing, that it may not be available because carriers have stopped binding coverage because there's a storm nearby. Now, that doesn't mean the storm is going to affect where the property is for the loan closing, but the rules can affect it. And it doesn't just affect loan closings for homes or properties, it could affect it for boats or for cars. Now, for cars and boats, carriers are a little bit more progressive in the sense of that they'll consider the area that is being affected. And most of the time, as they're making those decisions to stop binding in specific areas, they will do it by county or zip code, depending on the expected impacted areas. But for property insurance, it's generally a much broader decision. So a lot of times, anything that's going to impact the state of Florida could impact the ability to bind coverage anywhere in the state of Florida. And a lot of times during peak season, August, September, and October, hurricanes and tropical storms tend to pop up as clusters. So meaning that there can be 2, 3, 4, 5 at a time all over the Atlantic Ocean or in the Caribbean. And depending on their expected track, whether or not watches or warnings are placed could affect binding coverage, not just for 1 or 2 days, but in one particular year, 16 straight days where no coverage could be made effective. This is important to your loan closing because the interest rate that was agreed upon usually has an end date. And if you can't close by a specific date, either that has to be reset or more documentation has to be provided, which then further delays the loan closing. So if you're buying any kind of property, personal or commercial, in the state of Florida, especially during peak season, August, September, and October, you definitely want to be checking the National Hurricane Center's website to see the status of storms, to know if you need to make that decision to bind that coverage a little earlier than you usually would, simply because you don't want to delay that loan closing. After the storm passes, the companies do not immediately open up. Usually there's about a 48-hour period where carriers want to see what occurred before they decide to start binding coverage again. That's where your trusted insurance advisor comes in. Have a conversation about when you expect to close and be in constant contact with them to make sure you're making the bind decision at the most beneficial point to not delay your loan closing. If you don't have a trusted insurance advisor or you'd like a second opinion, reach out to us at www.depozitoinsurance.com. There you can chat, text, email, start your quote request right there online. If you found this video helpful, please share it with someone who you think might need it. Hit that like button. And if you want more of these insurance videos and some of the fun ones we make too, hit subscribe so you get notified. Thank you.